If you're just joining my series on dialogue, then I suggest you first look at part 1 through 4 before starting this one. It will make this video easier to follow. As we continue to explore a real conversation versus the dialogue you will put into your novel, we'll look at some of the things that sets them apart. But first, time for another of my little tales.
Okay, let's go.
A deadly fog was approaching a small town. Once it arrives, it will kill anyone who hasn't left for the safety of any place outside of its path. All the residents of Tabor knew of its lethal history. It is a storm that appears like clockwork every 130 years. Because of the length of time it takes to return, no one living has ever experienced it, and all those that had survived it have long since passed away, at the very least from old age. The people living today only have whatever has been compiled and put into the history books for reference, and those accounts were entirely from witnesses returning once the devastating force it brought with it had passed. No one could ever survive this storm. It wasn't the kind of storm that one might be able to endure if they took shelter inside a strong structure or had a shelter deep under their home to wait it out. It was the fog that traveled behind the storm. Even if someone were able to live through the initial storm, the following fog would undoubtedly kill them. You see, this fog is unlike any other. It is saturated with more than just moist air. Within that moist air are deadly pathogens that kill all that they come in contact with great precision. In the past, people from Tabor have tried several ways of defending against them. Over the years, they tried developing a vaccine to ward off the pathogens. And they even tried wearing breathing apparatuses until the fog had dissipated. But none worked. No vaccine that anyone was able to develop was successful in protecting them against the pathogens. And since the fog always remained for 1 full year, no breathing apparatus could offer them complete protection, and eventually they would succumb to the deadly pathogen, usually within days. You might be wondering, why would the people of Tabor simply move out of the fog's reach for the year and then return to their homes safe and sound? And the reason is because of the clause in their homeowner's agreement, which states that any homeowner that is living outside of Tabor for more than 6 months automatically forfeits their titles of ownership, and that property becomes the property of the state. They could, however, during the time of the fog, leave and then return before their 6 months is up before leaving again. But the agreement states that once they return, they have to remain in Tabor for a minimum of 30 days before leaving again. And since they would be infected with the pathogens just a few days after returning, no one would ever decide to return to certain death. But there is an addendum. Anyone who is able to remain inside of Tabor without being away for the 6 months would be able to claim all abandoned property as their own. Under the circumstances, no one was willing to risk their life for mere property. Then, as predicted, the storm arrived. It was as devastating as history wrote about. It was a brief storm and over quickly, and when it was, the quiet and deadly fog arrived. Most people had left a day or two before the storm arrived, and those few who decided to brave the storm didn't hesitate to leave once they saw the fog's approach. As the inhabitants of Tabor remained outside of the reach of the fog, finding new accommodations with family and friends, they occasionally looked out at the fog that hovered over the town and could be seen for miles in any direction. Then on the fifth month, an old man got up one morning and, after saying goodbye to his family, walked into Tabor and moved back into the family house. Today, I'll talk about how best to keep your dialogue tags sounding real without actually sounding too real. And then I'll tell you what made the old man head back home to his house knowing that it meant certain death. In normal conversation, we tend to use phrases such as, like, you know, it's not a proper way of expressing ourselves, but it is the way we do. Here's an example to better show what I mean. Lydia has just confessed to taking the cupcake and is in the process of explaining why she did it. Okay, I guess I shouldn't have taken the cupcake, but like I was needing a sugar fix, and like I didn't think I was sure nobody would mind if I took it, so I took it. Sorry. This may very well be the way this person speaks normally when nervous. Just keeping in mind that you usually never want to copy actual speech whenever possible. It will help the flow of your scene to represent her state of mind without mimicking her word for word. Except, of course, if it's important to your scene to showcase her in this manner. This is where your use of narration in conjunction with your dialogue will show an effective scene without removing any vital portion of it. Here's an example of what I mean. Lydia looked down at the remnants of icing that remained on her hands and then back at Carl, who sat waiting patiently for her answer. Okay, it was evident by her attempt to conceal one hand under the other while glancing over at the others in the room that she was nervous at being found out. I shouldn't have taken the cupcake. I guess I needed a sugar fix. Her eyes fell on her own hands as she desperately tried to rub away the last remnants of icing from her fingers. I didn't think, I mean, I was sure nobody would mind if I took it, so I took it. Sorry. It's important for your dialogue to stay true to the personalities of your characters by not changing the way they speak. You just need to make sure that she's not speaking so poorly that your reader can't understand anything she is saying. But keeping that in mind, you wouldn't have her speaking like this. I must confess, through my inability to stay true to a diet that consists of very little carbohydrates, I wavered from my task to maintain a suitable lifestyle and took what I believed to be a forgotten cake, an appetizer, if you will, but in truth, an unavoidable lure, resulting in the dereliction of my health as well as severely marring the trust I believe I no longer enjoy with all of you. My apologies. Apart from the fact that this dialogue doesn't flow with Lydia's earlier dialogue, it will have your readers believing it was interjected into the scene simply to impress. By not staying true to your characters, you run the risk of confusing your readers and hurting your story. When writing your dialogue, it's important to keep your characters genuine by not turning them into something they're not. Having said that, it's normal for characters to change throughout a story. Its success depends on it. But there must be some type of action or event that causes such a change in a character. The death of a loved one, the need to overcome adversity, a revealed hidden fact, and so on. A classic story titled Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes about Charlie Gordon, a man with an intellectual disability who undergoes experimental surgery to increase his intelligence. What makes this story so compelling is the fact that Charlie, a 32-year-old man with a low IQ, is selected for an experiment to enhance his intelligence. The narrative in this story is presented through progress reports written by Charlie. Before the experiment, it is evident that he can barely convey his thoughts effectively. But after the surgery, his intelligence increases rapidly, bringing it to the level of the doctor treating him. In a case like this, it is necessary to show the progression of his ability to communicate. And if you're wondering about the title, a mouse is given the same surgery and experiences a growth in its intelligence alongside of Charlie's. And the mouse's name is Algernon. Being found out after taking a cupcake will not have a character who says, I don't eat carbs, so it definitely wasn't me, to suddenly say something like, I must confess, through my inability to stay true to a diet that consists of very little carbohydrates, I wavered from my task to maintain a suitable lifestyle. Removing the unnecessary ums and ahs and leaving in just enough to remain true to the character you've created, your scene of dialogue will have captured the essence of how a real person might speak without actually speaking like them or disrupting the flow. That's not fair, said little Angela. She was upset at getting the chipped teacup 2 days in a row. I had to use the broken cup last time. Do you remember this passage? It's from the example at the beginning of the theme series and a good example of dialogue working with narration. I can't stress enough the importance of dialogue in your novel, and I can't stress enough that the dialogue that you write for your novel is not the same as when you and your friends get together for a chat. I've mentioned throughout this series the importance of dialogue working in conjunction with narration. We've explored examples where the dialogue is unable to do a scene justice without the contribution of effective narration. Having said that, too much narration where the description of a scene overpowers the dialogue causes it to seem redundant. In a scene containing dialogue, that dialogue must be allowed to do its job. Once it has accomplished its job, narration need only fill in the gaps, not reiterate. If you're not sure what I'm saying, let's refer to our friends betting on the weather for this example. Looks like rain. Harley looked up at the rain clouds and thought to himself that it might rain. Been listening to the weatherman? Don't much care one way or the other about what he has to say. I've been watching those rain clouds. Not just rain clouds, them there are storm clouds. Wilfred had been looking up into the sky and began to think about how they weren't just rain clouds, but storm clouds. Too small for storm clouds, said Harley. Whatever the size, guaranteed, they're filled to the brim. Doubt they're holding enough to soak the crops. He looked over at the crops and thought about how the clouds didn't look like they were holding enough water. $10 says by morning, this will be swampland. You owe me 10 from the last time, said Harley. Wilfred couldn't help but think about how he never paid him the $10 from their last bet. Then tomorrow, we'll be even. In this example, the narration is doing more than it needs to. It's repeating information that the reader has already discovered from the dialogue. Here's a better example where the narration works well with the dialogue. Harley looked up at the rain clouds heading their way. Looks like rain. Been listening to the weatherman? Don't much care one way or the other about what he has to say. I've been watching those rain clouds. Wilfred had already stood next to his friend and was looking up into the sky. Not just rain clouds, them there are storm clouds. Too small for storm clouds, Harley said. Whatever the size, guaranteed, they're filled to the brim. Harley looked over at the crops with a look of dismay. Doubt they're holding enough to soak the crops. Wilfred turned to face his friends, hand out, ready to bet. $10 says by morning, this will be swampland. You owe me 10 from the last time. Extending his own hand, his actions told his friend he was willing to bet again. Then tomorrow, we'll be even. This is a good example of the dialogue doing its job of moving the story forward with just the right amount of descriptive help from the narration. Whether you're writing a scene of dialogue about two old farmers with nothing better to do than bet on the weather, or the gripping dialogue of a young intern's last conversation before she's struck and killed by a careless driver, you need to make it as indispensable to your story and as entertaining to your reader as possible. And now, I'll tell you the ending of the story I call Inherited from Death. The old man knew that once he stepped back into Tabor, the chances of him surviving were zero. Even if he remained for the 30 days and then left, securing his hold on his property, the pathogens in the fog would eventually be the cause of his death. No one could understand why he would do such a thing. If he lived long enough to see the fog gone, within months he too would be dead. So what would be the point? As the people watched him walk back into Tabor and disappear inside the fog, they just believed it to be the actions of an old and deranged man who just wanted to see his home one last time. But that wasn't his reason for doing it. You see, what the rest of Tabor didn't know was that this old man, Linstead Barton, was the richest man in Tabor, acquiring his wealth from generational inheritance. The thing is, he knew all too well about the clause that states that anyone remaining in Tabor can claim all of the abandoned property. And since he was the only one willing to remain, all the property in Tabor would become his. And you might be wondering the same thing all of the former residents of Tabor were wondering when they saw him disappear into the fog. What good would that do him after he was dead? That's easy. He wasn't doing it for himself. He had lived a good and full life. Like his grandfather and his grandfather before him and his grandfather before him, he gave up his life to the fog. And by doing so, claimed all of the property in Tabor just like his family had been doing for centuries. Then after he was dead, his grandson would inherit all of the property which he would then sell back to the residents for a tidy profit. Thanks for watching, and if you found anything that I said beneficial to you in any way, hit that subscribe button because you never know. My next video might just be helpful too. No se detiene, la música niega, la música nos envuelve, nos mantiene, vamos todos a disfrutar.